The workshop door opens at 5:15, same as always. February cold pours in behind Thomas Whitworth and his crew, 3 men carrying lunch pails, their breath visible in the lamplight. The foundry building smells like iron and old coal, but something's different this morning. There's movement where there shouldn't be. Whitworth stops. His lamp swings forward and the light catches it, the flywheel turning. Not fast, just a slow, deliberate rotation, maybe 1 revolution every 8 seconds. The kind of movement that suggests purpose, not accident. The massive iron wheel catches the lamplight on each pass, throwing shadows across the brick walls like a slow heartbeat. Nobody speaks. The boiler sits cold against the far wall, no fire beneath it, no glow from the firebox, no shimmer of heat. Whitworth moves closer, one hand extended toward the metal. He expects warmth. There is none. The boiler housing is ice cold under his palm, the same temperature as the February air outside. Behind him, young Daniel Morrison sets his lunch pail down too carefully, the metallic clink echoing in the space. The sound seems wrong somehow, intrusive. The workshop is supposed to be silent at this hour, waiting. Instead, there's this quiet, mechanical breathing, the faint squeak of the flywheel bearing, the whisper of the crosshead sliding in its guides. Whitworth walks around the engine. It's a small horizontal mill engine, maybe 8 horsepower on a good day. They use it to drive the grinding wheels when the main steam plant is down for maintenance. Simple machine, single cylinder, slide valve, nothing fancy. He installed it himself 3 years ago. He knows every bolt, every casting mark, every quirk in its operation. The connecting rod extends and contracts with each flywheel rotation. The piston must be moving inside the cylinder, but there's no steam. The supply valve is closed. He can see the wheel in the off position from here. The condensate drain is shut. The steam line running from the main boiler room hangs cold and dry. His foreman's lamp throws hard light across the cylinder head. No frost, no condensation trail, no evidence of steam flow. Just bare cast iron, dark with old oil and dust. Yet the piston rod slides back and forth through its gland with the patient rhythm of something that has been running for hours. Morrison finally speaks, his voice thin. Did someone leave it running last night? Whitworth doesn't answer immediately. He's watching the crankshaft journal, the way the counterweight rises and falls. He's calculating in his head the momentum needed to keep a flywheel this size turning, the friction in the bearings, the resistance of the valve gear. This shouldn't be possible, not without power input, not without steam. Check the logbook, he says. Morrison crosses to the tool bench where the shift log sits. He flips back through the previous night's entries. His finger traces down the column. Engine secured at 7 o'clock. Bleed valve opened, steam line isolated, signed by Crawford. Crawford is careful. Crawford is precise. If he says the engine was shut down, it was shut down. The third man, Hobbs, older, grey-bearded, 26 years in the mills, has been standing near the door this whole time, not moving. Now he speaks, and his voice carries something Whitworth doesn't like. That's not right, Hobbs says. That's not natural. Whitworth turns. It's mechanical. There's an explanation. Then explain it. He can't, not yet. The flywheel continues its rotation, patient and inexorable. Each time it completes a cycle, the piston reaches the end of its stroke with a soft metallic tick, metal meeting metal with just enough force to be audible. It sounds almost like a clock, like something keeping time. The sky outside the high windows is beginning to grey with dawn. The workshop emerges from shadow, the forge cold and dead, the tool racks undisturbed, the floor swept clean from the night before. Everything in its place. Everything except this. One small engine, turning in the dark, with no fire to feed it. Whitworth reaches out and grabs the flywheel rim with both hands. He tries to stop it. The wheel doesn't stop. Whitworth's hands grip the cold iron rim, his boots bracing against the floor, and he pulls back. The flywheel slows. He can feel the momentum fighting him, the weight of spinning metal resisting, but it doesn't stop. It shudders, strains against his grip, and then the force reverses. The wheel jerks forward, nearly pulling him off balance. He lets go, stumbling back 2 steps. Morrison makes a sound, half gasp, half laugh, the kind of noise that escapes when the world stops making sense. "It pulled," he says. "It pulled back." Whitworth is staring at his palms. No burn marks, no heat, just the cold iron taste that comes from touching frozen metal. He looks at the cylinder again. The piston rod is still moving, still sliding through its guides with that patient, deliberate rhythm. But now he sees something he missed before. The engine is rocking. Just slightly, maybe a 1/4 inch forward, then back. The mounting bolts are tight, he can see that from here. But the whole machine is shifting on its bed with each stroke, like something breathing. Not the smooth vibration of an engine under load. This is different. This is uneven, arrhythmic. It's the movement of something fighting itself. Hobbs backs toward the door. "I'm getting the foreman." "I am the foreman," Whitworth says. But Hobbs is already gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor toward the main building. Morrison moves closer to the cylinder. He's young enough to still be curious, still willing to touch things that frighten him. His hand hovers over the steam chest, the valve chamber where pressurized steam would normally enter. He glances at Whitworth. "Should I?" "Don't open anything." But Morrison is already turning the drain cock at the bottom of the steam chest. It's a small valve, meant to release condensation. He cracks it open 1 turn. Nothing comes out. He opens it further. Still nothing. No steam, no water, just a soft sigh of air, and then a sound that makes both of them step back. A wet, sucking noise, like something drawing breath. The drain cock trembles in Morrison's hand, and he slams it shut. "There's something in there," he whispers. Whitworth wants to tell him he's being ridiculous, wants to say it's just air pressure, just some residual vacuum effect. But he heard it too. That sound wasn't mechanical. Or rather, it was mechanical, but it was wrong. Organic, like the engine was tasting the air. The flywheel continues turning. 1 rotation every 8 seconds. Tick at the end of each stroke. The crosshead slides back and forth in its guides, and now Whitworth can hear the faint whisper of metal on metal, a sound like something moving through water. Voices in the corridor. Hobbs is returning with others. Whitworth can hear the superintendent's voice, sharp and annoyed. Charles Brennan, who doesn't like mysteries, who doesn't like disruptions to the morning routine. The door bangs open, and suddenly there are 6 men crowded into the workshop, all of them talking at once. Brennan pushes through. He's a thick man, red-faced, with the kind of authority that comes from 30 years of making machines behave. He takes one look at the turning flywheel, and his expression goes flat. "Who started this?" "No one," Whitworth says. "Then stop it." "We tried." Brennan stares at him for a long moment, then crosses to the engine. He doesn't hesitate. He grabs the flywheel with both hands and throws his full weight backward. The wheel slows, shudders, stops, and then rocks forward again. Brennan staggers, catches himself. The flywheel completes another rotation. Tick. "Jesus Christ," someone mutters behind them. Brennan steps back, breathing hard. He's looking at the engine the way you'd look at a dog that just bit you, confused, angry, betrayed. "The boiler," he says. "Check the goddamn boiler." 2 men move to the boiler housing. They open the inspection port, peer inside. One of them reaches in with a bare hand, then withdraws it quickly. "Cold," he reports. "Firebox is clean. No ash, no embers, nothing." Morrison speaks up, his voice shaking now. "Sir, we heard. There's something in the cylinder. When I opened the drain." "What did you open?" Brennan wheels on him. "Just the condensate drain. And there was this sound like..." "Like what?" Morrison swallows, like it was breathing. For a moment, nobody speaks. The only sound is the engine, the slow squeak of the bearing, the whisper of the crosshead, the tick at the end of each stroke. 6 men standing in the grey dawn light, watching a machine that shouldn't be moving. Brennan's voice drops to something quieter, more dangerous. Get every man away from this shop. Lock the doors. I want Harrison from the engineering office down here within the hour. He looks at the engine, and for the first time, Whitworth sees something in the superintendent's face that he's never seen before. Fear. And someone, Brennan adds, still staring at the turning wheel. Tell me when this thing s. Harrison arrives at 8:30 with a leather satchel full of tools and an expression that suggests he's been interrupted in the middle of something important. He's the senior engineer from the main works, Cambridge-trained, precise, the kind of man who speaks in measurements and tolerances. He sets his satchel down on the workbench and looks at the engine the way a physician looks at a patient. The flywheel is still turning, 4 hours now, maybe longer. Right, Harrison says. Let's be systematic about this. He starts at the steam supply. The main line comes down from the overhead pipe, drops to a stop valve, then connects to the engine's steam chest through a 3-inch pipe. Harrison places his palm against the stop valve wheel. Cold, he confirms. He traces the line with his fingers, checking every joint, every union. All cold. He opens the stop valve completely. The wheel turns easily, no resistance. Still no steam flow. The valve's been closed all night, Whitworth offers. Harrison doesn't acknowledge this. He moves to the steam chest itself, the cast-iron chamber where the slide valve should be directing steam to either side of the piston. He taps it with a knuckle, a hollow, dead sound. No pressure. He unscrews the inspection cover, works it free with a wrench. The threads are stiff, reluctant. Finally, the cover comes away. Inside the steam chest, nothing, just an empty cavity, the slide valve sitting in its guides, motionless. The surfaces are dry, no steam condensation, no water film. Harrison runs a finger along the valve face. It comes away clean. No steam, he says, more to himself than anyone else. He replaces the cover and moves to the cylinder. This is the heart of it, where steam pressure should be driving the piston back and forth. He places both palms against the cylinder walls. Temperature. Cold, Brennan says from behind him. We checked. Harrison pulls a small spirit thermometer from his satchel, holds it against the cylinder casting. They watch the mercury. It settles at 41 degrees, barely above the ambient temperature in the workshop. He moves the thermometer to the cylinder head, then to the piston rod gland. All the same, 40, 42 degrees. No heat signature anywhere. But it's running, Morrison says, stating the obvious. Harrison doesn't respond. He's studying the valve gear now, the eccentric sheave that drives the slide valve, controlling the timing of steam admission and exhaust. In a normal engine, this should be moving in synchronization with the crankshaft. He watches 2 complete flywheel rotations, his eyes tracking the eccentric rod. The valve gear is working, he says slowly. It's moving correctly, but there's no steam to distribute. He crouches beside the cylinder and presses his ear against the cold iron. Everyone goes quiet. The flywheel turns, and Harrison's eyes close, concentrating. After a full minute, he straightens. There's something, he says. Not steam movement, something else. A pressure change, very faint. Pressure from where? Brennan demands. I don't know yet. Harrison moves to the flywheel itself. It's a beautiful casting, 6 spokes, perfect balance, machined rim. Maybe 300 pounds of iron, spinning at perhaps 7 revolutions per minute. He pulls out a pocket watch, times 3 complete rotations. Consistent speed, he notes. No acceleration, no deceleration. Something is maintaining the momentum. He places his hand against one of the spokes as it passes. The wheel shudders slightly but continues. Significant kinetic energy, he murmurs. But where's the input? For the next hour, Harrison methodically checks every component. He inspects the piston rod gland for steam leaks, none. He checks the crankshaft bearings for unusual heat, normal temperature. He examines the connecting rod for flex or failure, solid. He opens the flywheel inspection ports and peers inside at the counterweights, perfectly balanced, no hidden mechanisms. The logbook confirms Crawford's entries from the previous night. Engine stopped at 7 o'clock. Steam isolated, condensate drained. Harrison finds Crawford in the main building and brings him back to the workshop. The old machinist stands in the doorway, staring at the moving engine. "That's not possible," Crawford says flatly. "Describe your shutdown procedure," Harrison tells him. Crawford walks him through it. Close the stop valve, open the cylinder drain cocks to release trapped steam, let the engine coast to a stop, opened the flywheel vent to equalize pressure, made the final logbook entry. Standard procedure. He's done it 1,000 times. And it had stopped, Harrison presses. Completely. Dead stop. I waited 2 full minutes, not a tremor. Harrison turns back to the engine. The flywheel mocks them with its patient rotation. Tick at the end of each stroke. The morning sun is coming through the high windows now, throwing long rectangles of light across the workshop floor. The shadows of the spokes pass through these light patches in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. There has to be an energy source, Harrison says, more to himself than anyone else. Conservation of energy. Something is driving this. Steam, compressed air, mechanical spring, gravitational potential, electromagnetic induction, something. He checks them all. No steam. No compressed air lines anywhere near the engine. No spring mechanisms. The engine sits on a level concrete bed. No gravitational advantage. No electrical equipment in the building at all. Brennan is getting impatient. So what's moving it? Harrison doesn't answer. He's staring at the cylinder drain cocks, the small valves at the bottom of each end of the cylinder. He crouches down, brings his face close to one of them. Morrison said he heard something when he opened this. A breathing sound, Morrison confirms, reluctant. Harrison reaches for the valve, then pauses. How long was it open? Maybe 3 seconds, then I shut it. Harrison nods slowly. He wraps his hand around the drain cock and begins to turn it. 1/4 turn, half. The valve opens. And there it is again. Not quite a sound. More like a pressure change in the room, a subtle shift that you feel in your eardrums before you hear it. Then, a wet, sucking noise. Air moving somewhere it shouldn't. Harrison opens the valve fully. A thin stream of water drips out. Just a trickle, maybe a tablespoon's worth, but it's cold, colder than it should be. Harrison catches some in his palm. It's not steam condensation. It's too cold, too pure. He sniffs it. Nothing, just water. He closes the valve and moves to the opposite cylinder drain. Opens it. Same thing. A brief sucking sound, then a trickle of cold water. There's water in the cylinder, he says. From where? Brennan asks. The steam line is dry. Harrison stands, wiping his hands on his trousers. He's looking at the engine differently now, not as a malfunctioning machine, but as a puzzle that's just revealed its first real clue. Not from the steam line, he says quietly. From the air. Harrison sends everyone out of the workshop except Whitworth. He wants quiet, wants to think. The two of them stand in the empty space, watching the engine turn, and Harrison begins to speak, slowly, working through the logic as much for himself as for Whitworth. A cylinder is a sealed chamber, he says, or nearly sealed. The piston divides it into 2 spaces, front and back. When steam enters one side, it pushes the piston. When the steam exhausts, the opposite side admits fresh steam. That's basic reciprocating motion. Whitworth nods. He knows this. But our cylinder has no steam, Harrison continues. Yet the piston is moving, so something else is creating a pressure differential. Something that can push the piston from one side, then reverse and push it from the other. He walks to the cylinder, places his palm against it again. Still cold. What if the cylinder isn't empty, he says. What if there's air inside, ordinary air, and that air is changing pressure? How? Harrison crouches beside the drain cocks. Temperature, he says. Air pressure changes with temperature. If the air inside the cylinder is warming and cooling, even slightly, the pressure changes. Expansion and contraction. But the cylinder is cold, Whitworth protests. Now it is, but what about last night? Harrison stands, paces. Think about the timeline. Crawford shut the engine down at 7 o'clock. It was running all day, so the cylinder was warm, perhaps 150, 200 degrees. Hot metal. He gestures to the workshop windows, the grey February morning outside. Then what happens? The fire goes out. The building cools. It's winter. The temperature drops all night. Maybe down to freezing outside, maybe lower. That warm air trapped inside the cylinder starts to cool. As it cools, it contracts. That creates a vacuum. Whitworth is following now. A vacuum pulls the piston. Exactly, but here's where it gets interesting. Harrison moves to the steam chest. The slide valve controls which end of the cylinder is open to atmosphere, which end is sealed. As the piston moves, the valve gear shifts the valve. That means the vacuum effect can alternate, pulling the piston one direction then, as the valve shifts, pulling it the other direction. But the valve needs steam pressure to move it. No, Harrison shakes his head. The valve is mechanically linked to the crankshaft through the eccentric. The crankshaft moves the valve. If something, anything, moves the crankshaft, the valve follows. And once the valve starts moving, it can direct the vacuum effect. The system feeds itself. Whitworth frowns. But where does the first movement come from? The initial push. Harrison doesn't answer immediately. He's looking at the flywheel now, at its massive weight. The flywheel, he says finally. 300 pounds of iron, perfectly balanced. Last night, as the building cooled, there might have been a slight contraction in the crankshaft bearings, a microscopic shift in the mounting bed, just enough to move the flywheel a fraction of an inch. That tiny movement turns the crankshaft, which moves the valve gear, which creates a pressure differential, which pulls the piston, which turns the crankshaft further, which moves the valve again. A feedback loop, Whitworth says quietly. A feedback loop. Harrison crosses to his leather satchel and pulls out a small brass instrument, a pressure gauge. He screws it into one of the cylinder drain cock ports, replacing the valve. The needle sits at 0. He watches the piston complete several strokes. The needle doesn't move. Too small a pressure change, he mutters, but it's there. It has to be. He removes the gauge and replaces the drain cock. Then he does something unexpected. He lights a candle from his satchel, lets it burn for a moment, then holds it near the cylinder drain. He cracks the valve open slightly. The candle flame bends toward the opening. Not much, just a flicker, but it's visible. Air moving into the cylinder. Harrison closes the valve, waits for the piston to complete its stroke, then opens the drain on the opposite end. The flame bends away, air pushing out. There, Harrison says softly. The cylinder is breathing, inhaling on one stroke, exhaling on the other. The temperature differential is creating pressure changes, tiny, incremental, but the flywheel's momentum is amplifying them. Each small pulse adds to the next. The system is self-sustaining. Whitworth stares at the engine. So it's running on temperature. On temperature, air pressure, and mechanical inertia, the three of them locked in a cycle. Harrison blows out the candle. The flywheel is the key. Its mass carries the motion through the low-pressure phases. Without that momentum, the pressure changes would be too small to move the piston. But with it, he gestures at the turning wheel. You get this. For a long moment, they both watch the engine, the slow rotation, the patient tick at the end of each stroke. It's not running the way an engine should run, not with the violent force of expanding steam. It's moving the way a clock moves, the way a planet orbits. Inevitable, almost gentle. There's something else, Harrison says. He's looking at the steam supply line again at the stop valve. Morrison said there was a sucking sound when he opened the drain, louder than what we just heard, and water came out, cold water. Condensation, Whitworth offers. Maybe, but from where? Harrison traces the steam line with his finger. The line has been isolated all night. Cold and dry, you said. But what if there's a leak? Not in the line itself, but in one of the valves. A non-return valve, perhaps, or a check valve somewhere in the system. He follows the line to where it connects to the main steam header, the large pipe that runs the length of the building, carrying steam from the central boilers. There's a check valve here, meant to prevent backflow. Harrison examines it closely. This valve should be sealed, he says. But if it's worn, if the seat is damaged, he taps the valve body with his knuckle. It sounds hollow. There could be a small gap, just enough for air to leak through. And if the main header has residual moisture, and it always does, condensation collecting at low points, that moisture could be pulled into our engine's steam line by the vacuum effect. Pulled by the engine itself, Whitworth says. Exactly. The engine creates a vacuum, which pulls moisture through the leaking check valve, which enters the cylinder as cold water, which evaporates slightly in the relatively warmer cylinder, which increases the pressure differential, which drives the engine faster, which creates a stronger vacuum. Another feedback loop. Harrison straightens. His expression is no longer puzzled, it's something closer to awe. This engine, he says slowly, has created its own ecosystem. Temperature, pressure, moisture, mechanical inertia, all of them interacting, feeding each other. It's not haunted, it's not possessed, it's just accidentally alive. 3 days later, the engine is still running. Harrison has filed his report. Brennan has read it twice, understood perhaps half, and decided the safest course is to isolate the engine and let it run itself out. They've locked the workshop, posted a sign on the door, mechanical testing in progress, no entry. The morning shift workers give the building a wide berth. But word has spread. By the third day, there are perhaps 20 men gathered outside the workshop windows during lunch break, watching the flywheel turn in the dusty light. Some of them are making bets on when it will stop. Others are less amused. Whitworth checks on it twice a day. The speed is consistent, still about 7 revolutions per minute. The tick at the end of each stroke has become part of the factory's background noise, audible from 30 feet away if you're listening for it. The engine has settled into its rhythm, almost comfortable. Then, on the afternoon of the third day, the weather changes. It starts with wind, a front moving in from the north, carrying Arctic air down through the Midlands. The temperature drops 10 degrees in an hour. The sky goes from grey to iron dark. Men working the outdoor loading docks start pulling on extra layers, stamping their feet, breathing into their hands. Inside the workshop, something shifts. Whitworth is making his afternoon inspection when he hears it, a change in the engine's sound, not louder, faster. The tick at the end of each stroke is coming more frequently. He moves closer, watching the flywheel. 8 revolutions per minute now. 9. The piston rod is moving with more authority, the crosshead sliding faster in its guides. The whole engine seems more awake, more purposeful. Whitworth places his hand against the cylinder. Still cold, colder than before, actually. The metal is almost painful to touch. 10 revolutions per minute. 11. The pressure change. Harrison's report mentioned this. Rapid temperature drops would intensify the vacuum effect. The colder the outside air, the greater the contraction inside the cylinder, the stronger the pressure differential. But Whitworth didn't expect it to happen so fast, so dramatically. 12 revolutions per minute. The connecting rod is starting to blur with speed. The flywheel's shadow whips across the wall. The whole engine is vibrating now, the mounting bed humming against the concrete floor. Whitworth backs toward the door. This is beyond the slow, patient motion of the past 3 days. This is something else. The engine isn't just running anymore, it's accelerating. He turns and shouts down the corridor, "Harrison, get down here." By the time Harrison arrives, 5 minutes later out of breath, the engine is running at 15 revolutions per minute, faster than it ever ran on steam. The flywheel is a solid blur now, the spokes invisible. The sound has changed too, not the quiet tick anymore, but a rapid hammering, metal striking metal at twice a second. The crosshead is slamming against the ends of its guides. The whole machine is rocking on its bed. "Christ," Harrison breathes. He's staring at the engine the way you'd stare at a runaway horse. The temperature drop, I didn't think. The cylinder drain cocks are weeping now, thin streams of water running down the cylinder casting, pooling on the floor. The vacuum effect is pulling moisture through the leaking check valve faster than it can evaporate. The water is hitting the cold cylinder walls and condensing immediately, adding to the pressure differential, feeding the cycle. 18 revolutions per minute. 20. "We need to stop it," Whitworth shouts over the noise. Harrison is already moving. He grabs the stop valve on the steam supply line, throws it fully open. The idea is to equalize pressure, to flood the cylinder with atmospheric pressure, air, and kill the vacuum effect. But the valve is cold, the stem is stiff, and by the time he gets it open, the engine is running at 25 revolutions per minute. The sound is deafening now. The flywheel is screaming in its bearing. The piston rod is a silver blur, moving so fast the eye can't track it. The whole workshop is vibrating, tools rattling on their racks, the windows buzzing in their frames. Harrison lunges for the flywheel, trying to break it with his hands. Whitworth grabs him, pulls him back. "Don't, it'll take your arm off." 30 revolutions per minute. The mounting bolts are groaning. One of them shears with a sound like a gunshot. The engine lurches sideways, still running, now vibrating against the concrete with a grinding roar. "Clear the building," Harrison is screaming, but Whitworth can barely hear him over the noise. They're both backing toward the door now, unable to look away. The engine is beyond human scale now, beyond control. It's a force of nature, a small tornado of iron and inertia, feeding itself, accelerating toward some unknowable limit. 35 revolutions per minute. The flywheel rim is starting to glow. Friction heat from the air resistance. The temperature in the workshop is rising. You can feel it, a physical pressure against your face. And then, something breaks. Not catastrophically, not explosively, just a small mechanical failure somewhere in the valve gear. The eccentric sheave cracks, the eccentric rod disconnects, and suddenly the slide valve stops moving. It locks in position, holding both ends of the cylinder open to atmosphere. The pressure differential vanishes. The engine doesn't stop immediately. The flywheel has too much momentum for that. But it begins to slow. 30 revolutions per minute. 25. 20. The screaming bearing noise drops to a howl, then a roar, then a rumble. 15 revolutions per minute. 10. 7. The engine coasts for another 2 minutes, gradually surrendering to friction and air resistance. The flywheel makes its final rotations with the same patient slowness it had 3 days ago. The shadows of the spokes move across the wall, slower and slower. 5 revolutions per minute. 3, 2, 1. The flywheel stops. The workshop goes silent, so silent that Whitworth's ears ring with the absence of sound. Smoke is rising from the bearing housing. The mounting bed is cracked. Water pools around the cylinder base, reflecting the dusty light from the windows. Harrison is leaning against the wall, his face white. "That," he says when he can finally speak, "should not have been possible." Outside, men are running. Someone is shouting about fire. Brennan bursts through the door, looks at the motionless engine, looks at Harrison and Whitworth. "Is anyone hurt?" Harrison shakes his head. He's staring at the engine with something between respect and fear. "No," he says quietly, "but that machine just ran faster without steam than it ever did with it." They dismantle the engine over the next 2 days. Harrison insists on doing it himself, with Whitworth assisting. They want to understand exactly what happened, not just the theory, but the physical evidence. They need to see the mechanism with their own eyes. The cylinder comes off first. It takes 4 men to lift it clear of the piston. They set it on the workbench, and Harrison begins his examination. The bore is smooth, no scoring, no pitting. The piston itself is undamaged. But when he removes the cylinder drain cocks, he finds something interesting. Corrosion, just a trace, around the threads of the drain openings. The kind of oxidation that forms when water sits in contact with iron for extended periods. But the drains had been opened during shutdown, should have been dry. This corrosion is fresh, days old, maybe a week. "There's been water in this cylinder longer than we thought," Harrison says. Not from condensation, from a leak. They trace the steam supply line next. Follow it from the cylinder steam chest through the stop valve up to the main header. The check valve is there, a simple disc-type valve meant to seat against a bronze ring and prevent backflow. Harrison disassembles it carefully. The valve disc is worn, not dramatically, just a slight groove around one edge where it should seal against the seat. A gap maybe 1/16 of an inch wide, barely visible, but enough. Here's your leak, Harrison says. He runs his finger around the groove. This valve is supposed to prevent steam from flowing backward into the engine when the engine is shut down, but it also should prevent air from being sucked through from the main header. This gap means the valve is compromised. It can leak in both directions. He reassembles the check valve and has Whitworth help him remove a section of the main steam header, the big pipe that runs the length of the building. They drain it carefully. At least a gallon of water comes out, condensation that's been collecting in the low points of the pipe for months, maybe years. This is what the engine was pulling, Harrison says, holding up a jar of the water. It's rust-colored, slightly oily. Every time the cylinder created a vacuum, it pulled a small amount of this moisture through the leaking check valve. Not much, maybe a few ounces per hour. But over time, that water accumulated in the cylinder, and when the temperature dropped, that water vapor added to the pressure differential. Next, the valve gear. The eccentric sheave that drives the slide valve is cracked, a clean fracture through the cast iron. This is what stopped the engine during its runaway cycle. But before it broke, it was doing exactly what it was designed to do, translating the rotation of the crankshaft into reciprocating motion for the slide valve. The valve timing is critical, Harrison explains. He's sketching diagrams on a piece of paper showing the relationship between piston position and valve position. At the start of each stroke, the valve needs to open one end of the cylinder to atmosphere, or in this case, to the leaking steam line, and seal the other end. That creates the pressure differential. Then, at the end of the stroke, the valve reverses. The sealed end opens, the open end seals. The pressure differential reverses. The piston moves back the other direction. Whitworth studies the diagram. So the valve is creating the vacuum effect, not just directing it. Exactly. Without the valve gear working, without that precise timing, the engine would have moved maybe 1 or 2 strokes and stopped. But with the timing synchronized, each stroke reinforces the next. The system becomes self-perpetuating. The final component, the flywheel. Harrison has it lifted onto a balance stand, measures its weight precisely, 312 pounds. He calculates its moment of inertia, runs numbers in his notebook for half an hour. Finally, he looks up. The flywheel is what made this possible, he says. Its mass, its rotational inertia, carries the motion through the dead spots. There are moments in each stroke when the pressure differential is almost zero, when the forces are balanced. A lighter flywheel would stop during those moments. But this one, he taps the iron rim. This one has enough momentum to coast through the low-pressure phases and keep the cycle going. He shows Whitworth the calculations. The flywheel stores kinetic energy, energy that accumulates over each rotation. When the vacuum effect is strong, it adds energy to the flywheel. When the vacuum effect is weak, the flywheel releases that stored energy back into the system. The result is a relatively smooth, consistent motion, even though the driving force itself is pulsing and irregular. It's an energy reservoir, Harrison says, and a very efficient one. The bearing friction is low, the air resistance is minimal. Once the system reaches equilibrium, it can run for days on temperature differentials that you'd barely notice. With your hand, they reassemble the evidence. The leaking check valve, the accumulated water, the cold cylinder creating vacuum, the valve gear timing the pressure differentials, the flywheel amplifying and storing the energy. Each component alone is ordinary, mundane. But together, under the right conditions, they form something unexpected. Harrison writes his final report that evening. It's 12 pages long, dense with calculations and diagrams. The conclusion is simple. The engine was running on ambient temperature differentials, atmospheric pressure changes, and mechanical resonance. No outside energy input, no violation of physical laws, just an accidental arrangement of components that happen to create a self-sustaining thermodynamic cycle. The perfect alignment of conditions, he writes in the final paragraph. Remove any single element, the leaking valve, the cold weather, the flywheel mass, the valve gear timing, and the effect vanishes. But with all elements present, the engine achieves a state of quasi-equilibrium, drawing energy from the temperature gradient between the cylinder and the surrounding air. Brennan reads the report, nods slowly, and files it away. The engine is repaired, new check valve, new eccentric sheave, new mounting bolts, and returned to service. It runs normally now on steam, the way it was designed to. Nobody talks about the 3 days it ran without fire. But Whitworth sometimes stops during his morning rounds and places his hand against the cold cylinder, remembering the way the flywheel turned in the darkness, the wet, breathing sound from the drain cock, the moment when the machine seemed to wake up, to become something more than the sum of its parts. He never tells anyone, but sometimes, in the deep cold of winter, when the temperature drops suddenly, he thinks he can feel the engine wanting to move. A faint tremor in the mounting bed, a whisper of pressure change, the ghost of that accidental life still haunting the iron. The engine runs for another 12 years after that February morning. It drives grinding wheels and pumps and ventilation fans, performing the work it was designed for. Harrison's report is filed in the engineering office, where it gathers dust alongside 1,000 other technical documents. The men who witnessed the event move on, some to other factories, some to retirement, some to grave. But the story persists. It becomes one of those workshop legends that older mechanics tell younger apprentices during night shifts. The engine that ran without fire, the machine that came alive. Most of them get the details wrong. They say it ran for a week, for a month. They say it moved faster than any steam engine in history. They say Harrison had to shoot it to make it stop. The facts erode, become myth, but something essential remains. The understanding that machines sometimes can surprise us. Because that's what Harrison discovered, really. Not a ghost in the machine, not supernatural intervention. Something stranger. The industrial age had created conditions where physics itself could generate unexpected behavior, where temperature, pressure, momentum, and time could align in ways that mimicked intention, where metal could seem to breathe. The workshops and factories of the 19th century were full of such accidents, engines that harmonized with their foundations and shook buildings apart, flywheels that rang like bells at certain speeds, boilers that sang in keys determined by their dimensions. The machinery wasn't just performing work, it was exploring the boundaries of mechanical possibility, finding resonances and equilibria that no engineer had planned. Harrison understood this. In his private notes, discovered years later after his death, he wrote about that February morning with something like reverence, not for the engine itself, but for what it represented, the moment when he realized that the world he'd helped build was more alive than he'd imagined, that the forces they'd harnessed, steam, pressure, inertia, weren't merely tools to be controlled. They were systems with their own logic, their own tendency toward complexity. "We think we command nature," he wrote. "We think our machines are obedient servants, doing only what we design them to do. But nature is more creative than we are. Give it the right conditions, metal, heat, cold, motion, and it will find solutions we never considered. It will create behaviors we never intended. Our machines are not sealed boxes. They are open systems, constantly exchanging energy with their environment, constantly finding new equilibria." The engine that ran without fire was proof of this. It hadn't violated any laws of physics. It had simply found a path through those laws that no human had anticipated, a way to extract work from temperature differentials too small to notice, a way to sustain motion through carefully timed pressure pulses, a way to exist in the narrow zone between rest and runaway, between silence and self-destruction. It was, in a sense, the first autonomous machine, not because anyone programmed it to be autonomous, but because the conditions of its existence made autonomy inevitable. Given metal, air, temperature, and time, it had bootstrapped itself into motion. It had become, for 3 winter days, a genuine thermodynamic engine, drawing power from the cold February, ere the way a living thing draws power from its environment. And that's the real lesson of the story. Not that machines can be haunted, not that engineers can be fooled, but that the boundary between the mechanical and the organic is thinner than we think. That complexity emerges from simplicity under the right conditions. That life, or something like it, is not a special property reserved for flesh and blood, but a pattern that matter falls into when energy flows through it in the right way. The engine sits now in a museum, part of an industrial heritage collection. The placard beside it mentions its horsepower, its year of manufacture, its maker. It doesn't mention the 3 days in February when it ran without steam. That story exists only in archived engineering reports and fading memories. But sometimes, and the museum docents will tell you this if you ask them quietly, away from the tour groups, sometimes in the deep winter, when the building's heating system struggles and the temperature drops near freezing, they swear they can hear something from the engine room. Not a sound exactly, more like a vibration, a rhythm, like something massive and patient, breathing in the dark. The flywheel, still perfectly balanced after 130 years, waiting. The cylinder, cold and empty, waiting. The valve gear, seized now with rust but still precisely timed, waiting. All the elements still there, still capable of aligning. Still capable, under the right conditions, of waking up. Because that's what Harrison learned, there in the workshop, watching a machine that shouldn't have been. Moving, we didn't just create the industrial age. We created an ecosystem. A world where metal and heat and pressure could interact in ways that approached life. Where engines could dream in thermodynamics. Where the boundary between the built and the born, between the designed and the alive, became uncertain. The engine that started without fire wasn't a malfunction. It was a glimpse of something larger, the vast, strange space of possibility that opened up when humans started pouring energy into metal at industrial scales. A space we're still exploring, still discovering, still sometimes surprised by. And in quiet moments, in cold workshops, in the hours before dawn when the temperature drops and the air pressure shifts and the old machines creak in their foundations, in those moments, the descendants of that first engine are still out there, still waiting, still capable of waking up, still teaching us that the world we built is more alive than we ever intended it to be.